Hello, this is Justin Okroho from Scatterwork, and I'm here to talk about driving Lean Six Sigma with a project mindset. Lean Six Sigma is a really good tool for identifying what needs to be done, either to avoid waste, as in lean, or to get more predictable results from, for example, from manufacturing, as with Six Sigma. So that's fine. But the problem is that when we try and actually do those things, we have to do them through people. And Lean Six Sigma doesn't really get into that territory about how you do it, but project management does. And if we bring the two together, then we have a really good chance of identifying things that need to be done and then doing them. So that's what we're into here. We're talking about bridging this gap between Lean Six Sigma and project a way of doing things. So we're going to talk about four things here. One of them is what lean is, and then what project management is, and where the overlap is, and so forth. And then the second thing is this shift to a mindset. It's really a mindset thing. It's not a tool. It's not as though you can just program it and say, use that tool. But we need to use the skills of project management to get things done. And then there's a number of things there that we can do to navigate the barriers. And some of them are, if you like, presented by the Lean Six Sigma approach, and some of them come from project management. And if we have a list of them and we understand them and we can use them when we need to, then we have a better chance of completing what's there. And then the fourth thing is that we want to lock in the gains. Obviously, when we've done some work and we've improved something, we don't want it to just disappear because people don't get involved in it. It works in the area of global challenges and managed success. So we've got people in different places doing different things. We might call them initiatives. We might call them assignments, projects, ventures, whatever you like to call them. And they can be particularly challenging if, for example, the result is something that's very expensive, like infrastructure, or if something we want to do urgently and we need quick decisions and movement and so on, or if the people involved are distributed in different parts of the world or even in different parts of the same country, or if there are significant cultural differences within the group, and then that could be associated with being in different places as well. So when we have all these things, then it can be very challenging to get things done. And project management is the if you like, is the knowledge area that helps us address those issues so that we can get things done. So in Scatterwork, we have a number of PMP consultants, and they're in different parts of the world, and that enables us to address quite a broad body of project assignments. So here's an example of one of them. We had a customer who was selling products into the Chinese market, and the products included a pharmaceutical element. So each individual product or combination had to be ratified and certified and so on. And the problem was it was being done from Europe. So the person doing it, were very experienced person, but didn't happen to speak any Chinese and or couldn't read Chinese. And the culture is obviously very different from one side of the world to the other. So what we came up with was a standard way of seeking recognition or recording of these products as they came in. And the next time a client came, he said, "Yeah, this is the way we normally do it. Is that okay?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, that looks pretty good. That's very good." And then he said, and this was the killer. And then he said, "Well, we think it would be fair if you took half the costs." And they said, "Okay, that sounds fair enough to us." So he halved his costs, but he also got stakeholders in China to work with him. So it got immensely easier and it saved a lot of money. So it was a very successful engagement. This webinar is one of a series, Breakthrough Project Barriers. And we have a cycle and we run through roughly one a month, and the cycle repeats roughly yearly. And so the topics that are there give you actionable tips for real world project issues. And we have strategies for reducing delivery times and cost and risk and so on. And the approach that we take is not dependent on a particular methodology like Agile or Waterfall or whatever. So whatever your project environment is, you should be able to get value out of it. So the items are in a cycle, but they're not dependent on each other. So you can really jump in at any stage and come every month, and then drop out again when you've gone through all of them. So here we are. We're talking about lean meets project management. So just to remind ourselves, Lean Six Sigma has these two powerful tool sets. It has Lean and it has Six Sigma. So Lean focuses on reducing waste, and the types of waste, there are 8 types of them here. Things like waiting is time lost, or overproduction, and then stuff sits in the waiting room. It's not being sold and has no value and so on. And then Six Sigma has the tools in it so that we can have more predictable manufacturing, for example. And the two together, they reduce costs for manufacturing considerably. Now, once we find out what needs to be done, then we go into this cycle of implementing improvements. So the first step is to define it, which is what we've been talking about now, and then measure, find out what's actually happening, and then analyze those results, and then make some proposals. Well, okay, what are we going to do to improve things? And then a control loop to make sure that they actually did. So implementing things in the steps like that is very good, because you say to people, okay, do this, and then it's an easy way of getting something carried out without having to spend tons of time on training, for example. So it works very well. And the focus is we come up with these things that we want to improve, and then we go away and do it. But as I say, the operational reality is that these things here, they all work well, provided that the organization supports you. But if, for example, you try and do things and maybe your colleague's manager doesn't agree and things like that, then you can get into a situation where the benefits are not achieved. So project management, on the other hand, takes a project, in theory, what you could say, a sort of a one-off activity. And because it's one-off, you don't have any norm to apply to it. You can't say, well, it normally happens this way and normally happens that way. So the amount of effort going into planning is probably more than it would be for some repeatable operational issue. So project management, it goes into all sorts of things on both the management side and on the leadership side. So management side, we're talking about things like having the right equipment and the right materials and the right tools and that type of thing. And on the leadership side, a project moves because the people who are involved in it actually do things and they decide to move forward. They're obviously not going to do that unless they feel that you're leading them. Otherwise, people, they lose energy, or they think, well, there's no point in doing it because here the organization is not very good, or something like that. So that the leadership side of project management dovetails very well with Lean Six Sigma, and provide some suggestions about how we operate in that environment so that we get things done through people. So as I say, it's not usually because of the tools that things fail, but maybe lack of governance, maybe the interaction between people isn't properly set up, and we get friction. In other words, we try and do things and somehow they don't get done, and so on. And project management tends to focus on that side of things. It also focuses, of course, on identifying the issues and approaches and so on. But Lean Six Sigma does that also for the particular area. And therefore, we're not going to use project management in that area. So we've got both of them. We've got Lean Six Sigma and we've got project management. And we're looking for where these two overlap each other and for the synergies that we can get from doing them. So as I say, we can use Six Sigma to help us identify what needs to be done and make sure that it's done in measurements and things like that. And then we use project management to address the people side of things in getting them done. So to get the benefits and the synergy, then we have to shift to a project mindset. And at a simple level, we might say, oh yeah, we're doing Lean Six Sigma here. We have various things that we have to do to remove the barriers to improvement or something like that. So that's a very passive sort of approach. But if we move from being just an analyst or a data analyst to somebody that owns the outcome, then we have a different type of interaction there. And the interaction is very much human, and leadership is the element, as it were, that we need to apply to the situation so that the other people that are involved also engage, and we have some chance of delivering the goods. So there are lots of strengths of the project mindset. And within project management, there are two major themes or approaches to it. And one is predictive and the other is agile. So predictive is when you know before you start what the outcome is going to be. And agile is better where you don't know, or if you have things that can be sort of undone without too much expenditure, then you can be agile. Obviously, if you're building a bridge, you can't suddenly move it, a kilometer down the river. So it's very much a predictive project. So what have we got? Well, we've got ownership. Predictive project management says ownership. Okay, this is your baby, as it were. For every milestone, whoever it is owns that. It tends to define the scope, and it says this is what we should be doing. And if people drift outside of that, they're doing something that hasn't been assigned, and that's obviously going to slow them down. So one of the reasons people don't meet their time milestones very often is somehow they get involved in other things that they find very interesting or whatever, but not necessarily focused on the result. And having fixed timelines, that tends to speed things up, and it got a shared feeling of when we should get these things done. Now, agile project management also has some very good ideas that are relevant. One of them is the minimum business increment. So whenever you do some work, you should always leave the place in such a way that it still works. And so you complete something. It might be only a small item. It might be a change of size of text, or a new link on a web page, or whatever it might be. But whatever it is, it's valuable in its own right. And we try and do one of them every time that we get engaged. We don't want to leave things half open. And another thing that Agile emphasizes is daily stand-up meetings to find out if there are any issues. And by doing it every day, then you get a chance to see new things are coming up. You're not just putting them on a list and saying, we need to talk about that next week. So there are a lot of things that those are only some of them, but there are other strengths, obviously, of both predictive project management and agile. Now, just to remind ourselves, the difference between predictive and agile, I would describe it this way: that for predictive project management, what we do is we describe the scope of what we want done. So, for example, if we're taking our car for servicing, they say we need to check this and this and this and this and change the oil and so on. And then the work is done when it's finished. So if you come to the garage and say, could I have my car back? They say, well, we're not ready yet. Could you come back in an hour because we need to do this and this? So that the handover or the review of where you got to happens when the agreed work has been done, the scope. But in agile project management, we take a different approach. We take the approach, we say, okay, this is the amount of time you've got. And when we get to the end of that, we're going to stop and review where we are. And there could be technical changes in the meantime, but there could be environmental changes, things like an exchange rate change or something like that, that would affect our priorities. So instead of working until something is completed, we work until the agreed timescale is closed. Typically, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, for example. And then we will review where we are and work out the priorities again and move off again. So here we stop to consider where we are because the time ran out. And here we stop to consider where we've got to because the things that we spoke about have actually been delivered. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to focus on as little of project management as we can so that we get the best payback out of Lean Six Sigma. And, as I say, think of the 80-20 rule, that probably 20% of what you do gives you 80% of the results. And prioritize the activities which have a high impact on waste reduction. So how are we going to do it? So this section here, it takes several features of either Lean Six Sigma or project management. And it just suggests, yeah, these are things that we could use in this environment. And the first of them is to decide to use Lean Six Sigma. And as I mentioned earlier, it has two focuses. One is eliminate waste, and the other is reduce variation. So even making the decision you're going to use that, you're moving in the right direction. Now, the cycle that it uses to implement is like this: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And then you go around again if you want to. And these steps are well documented, they're well known. And as I said before, it's easier to get people to do things. You just say, well, do this, now do this, and so on. So you don't really need to train people in a big way to bring them up to speed in that sort of situation. Another thing we need to do, and it comes from the project management side of the house, is identify the stakeholders. And that includes supporters and opposition, and find out how to communicate with them effectively. Because we may know, because of Lean Six Sigma, there's a particular I don't know, a particular item we need to replace. But maybe it's in a manufacturing environment and the production manager says, no, you can't do that because it's the wrong time of week, we're busy, something like that. So we need to know how to manage the stakeholders. We need to know how to manage the costs as well, because nobody is saying that you should have infinite quality for an infinite cost. Somewhere there's a balance. And again, who's going to agree that the balance is correct? Where are the stakeholders that are going to do that? So we need to have a look at that as well. Schedule management is obviously a part of project management, particularly for predictive stuff. And Lean Six Sigma tends to be that way because you find out what an issue is, and then you say, right, this is it. Okay, this is what we're going to do about it. So by the time you get that far, the focus is relatively well defined, and then you can put realistic timescales against that. Another thing that comes from the agile world is the client demo. Every time you do an iteration that is called, and I mentioned 3 weeks might be a typical duration, you bring the client in again and you show them what you've done and say, do you like that? And if they say yes, then that's great. And if they say, no, I want a bit more of this and a bit less of that, you say to them, well, you're in charge of the direction and the focus. So, we've got all these things that we could do. Which ones do you want us to do? So the client is engaged and is actually party to the success because they make good decisions. Another tool from the project management world is the so-called RACI diagram, where you have basically a grid like an Excel sheet, and you say for each activity who's responsible or accountable or both, and who do you need to consult and who do you inform. Now, you may not have all four of those for every item, but you will certainly have a responsible person, and accountable is very often your boss. And the advantage there is if something goes wrong and let's say you're ill, you get onto your boss and you say, we're doing this client work, but I can't do, I'm ill. Then the person who is accountable gets engaged and make sure that they get the best value out of whatever situation is emerging. Another thing that the agile world goes in for is daily stand-up. And the idea here is not to have a meeting to resolve problems, but just to find out what they are. So even if the people who are at the stand-up have a problem to solve, they don't do it at the stand-up. They close the stand-up, maybe they get a cup of coffee and sit down again. But it's a different type of a meeting. The daily stand-up is just to collect information. Is there anything where somebody needs to talk to somebody else? Okay, and then you have risk management, of course, and project management is risk management, but you can go a level above that as well. You can say what are the potential risks that are happening, and by definition, risk is in future. And the classic ways to deal with negative risk: eliminate. If you don't want to be in a car accident, you travel by train. You mitigate or transfer either the probability or impact of a particular activity, or transfer. You might have a subcontractor and say to them, well, okay, you do this work here. And if it's their specialization, then that's so much the better. Okay, so we had quite a long list there of things that we could do to improve the situation that come either out of Six Sigma or project management. So now we need to look at the gains. And obviously we're using these project strategies to get around resistance. So, who are we dealing with, and, what turns them on and what annoys them, and what do they not like about your proposal, and, those sort of things. And if you can get answers to them, then you're on very solid ground. So at the end of all this, you close the project and you say, guys, it's finished. It's very important. Otherwise, things just go on forever and ever, and nobody's quite sure when it came to an end. Transition the ownership. In other words, pass the ownership over to somebody and say, it's all yours now. Manage the knowledge gained. So that a lot of that has to do with documentation of experience, how long it took to do things, and hints of things that you would do or not do again in future. And these days, of course, that type of knowledge base would be accessed by artificial intelligence. And then you could have post-implementation audits from time to time just to see that the new things that you introduced are actually being used. So this is the summary. We're saying that Lean identifies the waste removal opportunities, and the project mindset helps you remove the waste. And Six Sigma helps you have more predictable manufacturing. So again, it goes to reducing cost, because then, for example, you need less inspection. And the immediate action is to apply these mindset issues to the Lean Six Sigma project. So there you have it. So I hope that was useful to you. And if I can help you in any way with any issue on projects, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, thanks very much for participating. Thank you.